Lint Commander, you need to detach. Now. The voice was terrifyingly calm, cutting through the chaotic scream of ricochets echoing off the basalt tunnel walls. Negative, Viper! We are not leaving a teammate behind! Miller, grab her vest! Don't touch me! The sharp crack of the Mk-13 sniper rifle deafened them in the confined space. A body dropped in the darkness ahead, blocking the thermal bloom of 3 others rushing the choke point. Look at the floor, sir, she whispered, cycling the bolt. The metallic clack-clack was the only clean sound in the dirty air. Lieutenant Commander Graves looked down. His night vision flared, but he saw the black pool expanding rapidly beneath her prone legs. It wasn't a trickle. It was a torrent. The femoral artery. Jesus. Elena. I can't walk. You carry me. We're slow. We're slow. We're all dead. They're breaching the pressure doors behind us. You need to blow the tunnel ceiling at the junction. That will bury you. I know. She adjusted her scope, her breathing hitching just once, a sharp, wet gasp, before steadying. I have 26 rounds left. That's 26 dead hostiles. That buys you 3 minutes to set charges. Go. Elena. I said move, Commander. That is a direct interpretation of the mission profile. Save the intel, save the team. She fired again. Crack. Another drop. Go. Transmission breaks. Static fills the channel. 14 hours earlier, forward operating base, Copperhead, Hindu Kush border region. The staging room at FOB Copperhead smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and the aggressive musk of men who had spent too much time waiting for violence. Staff Sergeant Elena Wraith Kovic sat on a reinforced Pelican case, her knees drawn up slightly, eyes fixed on the bolt carrier group of her Mk-13 Mod 7. She ran a microfiber cloth over the steel, searching for carbon that wasn't there. Her movements were economical, precise, machine-like. She could feel the eyes on her. They were heavy, physical things, pressing against the back of her neck. You running heavy or light, Kovic? The voice belonged to Miller, the SEAL team's heavy weapons specialist. A man built like a refrigerator with a beard to match. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking to see if she knew the difference. Elena didn't look up. She slid the bolt back into the receiver with a satisfying metallic shuck. Standard loadout plus 2 extra mags for the secondary. Lightweight plates. I'm not planning to get hit. Miller scoffed, exchanging a look with the point man. Tex. Intel says tight quarters. That long gun of yours is going to be a fishing pole in a phone booth. You sure you don't want an MP7? My ROE is precision overwatch and counter sniper, Elena said, finally lifting her eyes. They were gray, cool, and utterly unimpressed. If I'm using my secondary, it means you guys didn't do your job. A few chuckles rippled through the room, but the tension remained thick. She was a Marine, and she was a woman. In the Tier 1 community, that made her a unicorn. In this specific briefing room, it made her a tourist. The door banged open. The room snapped to attention, the casual swagger evaporating instantly. Lieutenant Commander Graves walked in. Gravedigger wasn't a nickname he enjoyed, but it was one he earned. He was a man of few words and fewer smiles. He carried a tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue glow of the screen. Sit, Graves commanded. The team settled. Elena remained on her case, slightly apart from the main circle. Update from ISR, Graves said, tapping the screen. A grainy map projected onto the wall. Target is designated Bishop, arms dealer, former Spetsnaz logistics officer. He's holed up in the old Mughal mine complex in the valley. We thought it was a cave. Thermal scans show ventilation shafts here, here, and here. He pointed to heat blooms on the mountain face. This isn't a cave. It's a bunker. Structural integrity? Tex asked, chewing on a toothpick. Questionable. Soviet-era supports reinforced with local concrete. One way in, one way out. We insert via helo. Fast rope to the ridge. Infiltrate, secure bishop, and extract. Timeline is tight. 90 minutes before the moon comes up and we lose the shadows. Graves looked around the room, his gaze landing on Elena. Sergeant Kovic. Sir. This terrain is vertical. Lots of jagged rock, long sight lines before we hit the tunnel mouth. You are my eyes. If anything moves that isn't a goat, I want to know about it before it pulls a trigger. Can you keep up the pace? It was the question she hated most. Can you keep up? As if her biology was a defect in the mission plan. I'll be waiting for you at the breach point, sir, Elena replied, her voice flat. Graves held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. He was looking for a crack, a flinch. He found neither. Good. ROE is PID required. No collateral. This valley is friendly leaning, and we don't need the tribes coming down on us because someone got trigger happy. Weapons hot in 5 mics. Wheels up in 10. As the team scrambled to kit up, the noise level rose, Velcro ripping, plates sliding into carriers, radios checking in. Elena stood, slinging her rifle. The Mk-13 was heavy, nearly 15 pounds fully loaded with the suppressor and optics, but to her, it felt weightless. It was an extension of her will. She checked her dope, data on previous engagement card taped to the stock. Temperature outside was dropping. High altitude. The air would be thin. Bullets would fly flatter, faster. She adjusted her windage turret 2 clicks left, anticipating the valley draft. Hey, she turned. It was Graves. He was tightening the strap on his helmet, not looking at her. Sir? Miller's right about the length, he said quietly. Inside, stay in the rear. Cover the 6. Don't. Try to clear rooms with that thing. Understood. And Kovic? Sir? He finally looked at her. I didn't ask for you. HQ assigned you because of your language skills and the terrain certs. I know. Don't make me regret it. We move fast. If you fall behind, we don't stop. I won't fall behind. See that you don't. He turned away, tapping his headset. Viper 1-1 to Overlord. We are green. Oscar Mike. Elena pulled her Shema up over her nose, masking her expression. She checked her chamber one last time. Brass gleamed in the dim light. She didn't need their approval. She just needed a target. She followed the line of broad-shouldered men out into the swirling dust of the flight line, the rotors of the Black Hawk already screaming into the night, promising violence. The interior of the MH-60 Black Hawk was a freezing, vibrating purgatory. They were flying nap of the earth, the helicopter hugging the jagged contours of the Hindu Kush so tightly that Elena could almost reach out and graze the snow-capped peaks. The doors were open, letting in the biting wind that cut through her combat shirt and settled deep in her bones. Elena sat near the tail, her legs dangling over the edge. She didn't look at the SEALs across from her. In the wash of the green tactical lighting, they were just silhouettes, hulking masses of Kevlar and ceramic plates. She adjusted the focus on her GPN VG-18 panoramic night vision goggles. The 4 tubes merged the darkness into a seamless, grainy, green 97-degree field of view. 3 minutes to LZ Alpha, the pilot's voice crackled over the internal net. Weather is closing in fast, visibility dropping to 0. Elena checked her wrist altimeter, 10,000 feet and climbing. The air was thin here, starving the rotors of lift. The Black Hawk shuddered violently as it hit a pocket of turbulence. Copy, Razor 3-3. Graves replied, his voice steady. Maintain course. Negative, Commander. I'm getting severe wind shear. Thermal is washing out. I can't see the deck. We're drifting. Elena leaned out slightly, her harness biting into her shoulders. Below them, the world was a swirling gray soup of cloud and kicked-up snow. The pilot was flying on instruments, but in this terrain, instruments lied. Radar altimeters could bounce off a ridge and tell you there was ground where there was only 1,000-foot drop. We have to wave off, the pilot announced, tension spiking in his tone. Aborting LZ Alpha. We're RTB unless we find a hole in this soup in 30 seconds. Damn it, Tex cursed over the team channel. We scrub now, we lose the window? Graves keyed his mic. Razor, push to LZ Bravo. Bravo is a jagged ridge, Commander. With this crosswind, I can't stabilize a hover. Elena ignored the debate. She flipped her GPNVG tubes up and pulled out her handheld thermal monocular. It was a dedicated piece of recon gear, higher resolution than the pilot's navigational flyer. She pressed it to her eye, scanning the swirling gray void below. The thermal sensor cut through the moisture better than the image intensifiers. She saw the heat signature of the ridgeline, a cold, dark spine against the slightly warmer atmospheric haze. But then she saw something else. At the designated abort point for LZ Alpha, where the pilot was banking to turn, a cluster of white-hot pixels bloomed. They were rhythmic, breathing. Razor, hold your turn! Elena's voice cut through the comms, sharp and unauthorized. Who is that? Keep the net clear, the pilot snapped. This is Wraith. I have 5 thermal signatures at the abort coordinates. Dug in. Heat bloom consistent with concealed bodies. You bank left. You're flying right into a heavy machine gun nest. Silence on the net. The pilot hesitated. I don't see them on my display. Your display is wide angle. I'm zoomed 8x. They are waiting for the abort profile. It's an ambush. Graves didn't hesitate. Razor, trust the call. Do not bank left. If I don't bank left, I have to put it down now or we hit the mountain face. The pilot yelled, the aircraft lurching as he fought the collective pitch. I can't see a flat spot. Elena scanned frantically to the right. The thermal image ghosted as she swept the terrain. There, a small plateau, barely 20 feet wide, jutting out like a broken tooth. It held heat differently than the snow. Solid rock. 3 o'clock low, Elena called out. Flat shelf, range 100 meters. It's tight, but it's solid. I see nothing but cloud. Trust the thermal. 3 o'clock, hard. The Black Hawk banked aggressively to the right, stomach-churning G-force pinning them to the floor. The rotors screamed as the pilot dumped power to arrest their descent. The cloud cover shredded, and suddenly, the dark slate of the rock shelf appeared exactly where Elena had called it. Visual on the deck, the crew chief shouted from the other side. Good call, we're coming in hot. The helo didn't land. It couldn't. The shelf was too uneven. The pilot held a high hover, the wheels mere feet from the jagged stones. Fast rope! Go, go, go! Miller was the first out, the thick braided rope singing through his gloves. Tex followed. Graves looked at Elena for a split second. A nod, barely perceptible, before he grabbed the rope and slid into the darkness. Elena slung her rifle tight to her chest. She grabbed the rope. The rotor wash was a hurricane, battering her body, threatening to tear her grip loose. She didn't slide. She plummeted, checking her speed with her boots just before she hit the rock. She landed in a crouch, weapon up instantly. The cold was shocking, a physical blow that punched through her layers. She moved away from the rope, clearing the zone for the next man, scanning the darkness. The helicopter ascended immediately, the roar fading rapidly as it vanished back into the storm, leaving them in a silence that was even louder than the noise. "Sound off," Graves whispered over the inter-squad radio. "1 up. 2 up. 3 up. Wraith up." They were alive. They were undetected. The ambush team at the lower LZ was none the wiser. Graves signaled for a perimeter check. Elena moved to the edge of the shelf, looking down into the valley. The fog swirled below them like a living thing. She knelt to check the ground, testing the stability of the rock. As her hand touched the cold stone, she frowned. She tapped it with the butt of her rifle. Thud. It wasn't the solid, dead sound of a mountain. It was resonant. Deep. "Commander," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. Graves moved to her side, his silhouette looming large. "What is it, Kovic? You got us down. Good work." "We're not on the mountain, sir," she said, tapping the stone again. The vibration traveled up her arm, a low-frequency hum that shouldn't exist in natural geology. "We're on the roof," she murmured, looking at the expanse of rock that stretched into the dark. "This entire shelf, it's hollow." Graves knelt, placing his gloved hand on the ground. He felt it too. The faint, rhythmic thrumming of heavy machinery deep, deep beneath their feet. "Intel was wrong," Graves said, his voice grim. "This isn't just a hideout. It's a fortress." He stood up, signaling the team to move out. "Watch your step. We're walking on top of the hive." The traverse from the landing shelf to the mine entrance was a study in controlled violence against gravity. The team moved in a wedge formation, boots finding purchase on the slick basalt, weapons trained outward into the swirling fog. Elena brought up the rear. Her MK-13 was slung now, the long barrel cumbersome in the tightening terrain, replaced by her sidearm, a suppressed M9 Beretta. She moved with a low center of gravity, her eyes scanning the ridgeline above them. The wind had died down, replaced by an eerie, damp stillness that felt heavier than the storm. "Contact front, cold," Tex whispered over the comms. The team froze. 50 meters ahead, a dark fissure cut into the mountainside. It looked like a natural cave mouth, jagged and overgrown with hardy alpine lichen. But to a trained eye, the symmetry was too perfect. "That's it," Graves said. "Miller, bring up the jammer. Tex, you're on the door." Miller unclipped a black box the size of a brick from his pack, the ECM jammer. He thumbed the switch, and a small green LED blinked to life. If there were remote detonators or cellular triggers waiting for them, the jammer would create a localized dead zone, turning the airwaves into static sludge. "Jammer hot. We have a 10-meter bubble," Miller confirmed. Tex moved forward, his movements fluid. He approached the fissure not head-on, but from the side, pressing his body against the rock wall. He extended a fiber-optic snake camera, feeding the thin wire into the darkness of the cave mouth. Elena watched him work from her overwatch position 10 yards back. She didn't like this. Her skin crawled, a primal instinct that had nothing to do with the cold. She hated tunnels, rat holes. They took away her primary advantage, distance. In a tunnel, ballistics became simple geometry, and geometry didn't care about skill. "I've got a door," Tex murmured, staring at the small monitor on his wrist. "Heavy steel. Recessed about 10 feet in. Looks Soviet, rust on the hinges." "Rig it?" Graves asked. "Negative. It's too clean." Tex hesitated. "There's a wire running from the handle into the frame. Standard tension trigger. I can bypass it, but..." "But what?" But there's no dust on the threshold. Someone swept this recently. It feels baited. Elena shifted her position. She lowered her pistol and raised her thermal monocular again. But the rock face was too cold, masking any heat signatures. She switched to her naked eye, engaging the red light filter on her headlamp for a split second, sweeping the rock face around the entrance, not the door itself. Snipers were trained to look for the break in the pattern, the thing that didn't belong. She saw it, 6 feet above Tex's head, tucked into a natural crevice in the stone, was a small, dull object. It wasn't a rock. It was a matte gray cylinder, coated in a composite material to mimic the stone, a laser tripwire emitter. "Tex, freeze," Elena said, her voice barely a breath. The point man stopped, his hand inches from the doorframe. "Wraith? Don't touch the frame. Don't even touch the wall." Elena moved forward, stepping carefully, her eyes locked on the cylinder above him. "Look up. 11 o'clock, 2 meters above your helmet." Tex slowly tilted his head. "I don't see." "It's painted to match the shale. It's an active laser grid. You bypass the tension wire on the handle. You break the beam. It's a dual trigger system. The handle is the dummy. The laser is the kill switch." Graves moved up, his face grim. "Can we disable it?" "If we cut power, it might fail safe to detonate," Elena warned, crouching beside Tex. She could smell the faint chemical scent of the paint used on the device. It was fresh. "We have to trick it." "Trick it?" Miller grunted. "With what?" Elena reached into her pouch and pulled out a chemlight wrapper, silver, reflective on the inside. "Miller, I need your gum." "My what?" "You're chewing gum. Give it to me." Miller spat the wad into her gloved hand. Elena didn't flinch. She used the gum to stick the silver wrapper onto the end of her knife. She looked at Tex. "I'm going to slide this over the emitter lens. The reflection should bounce the beam back into the receiver, making it think the connection is unbroken. Once I do that, you cut the wire on the door." "That's a hell of a theory, Kovic," Tex said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing air. "It's not a theory. It's physics. On my mark." Elena reached up. Her hand was rock steady. She had held crosshairs on targets a mile away. Placing a wrapper on a sensor was just another form of shooting. She held her breath, sliding the reflective foil over the small glass eye of the emitter. Nothing happened. No click. No boom. "Mark," she whispered. Tex snipped the wire on the door handle. Silence. The wind whistled through the valley, a mournful, hollow sound. "We're clear," Tex exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Good eye, Wraith. I would have cooked us." "Let's save the applause," Graves ordered, though he gave Elena a sharp look of appraisal. "Breach." Quietly. Tex pushed the heavy steel door. It swung inward on well-oiled hinges, making no sound other than a soft rush of air. The transition was immediate and jarring. As Elena stepped across the threshold, the biting cold of the Hindu Kush vanished, replaced by a stagnant, humid warmth. The air smelled of wet concrete, diesel fumes, and something else. Something copper and old. She lowered her NVGs. The tunnel ahead wasn't the rough-hewn mine shaft they had expected. The walls were smooth, reinforced with seamless concrete. Overhead, shielded LED strips ran along the ceiling, currently dark, but the wiring was new. "This isn't a mine," Elena whispered, running a hand along the wall. "This is a bunker complex." "Check your corners," Graves hissed. "We're in the belly of the beast now." Elena checked her watch. They were 10 minutes behind schedule, and they had just walked into a trap that was far more sophisticated than anything intelligence had briefed. She tightened her grip on her weapon. The feeling of being watched was no longer a paranoid itch. It was a certainty. "Moving," she said, stepping into the dark. Behind her, the heavy steel door clicked shut, sealing them in. The deeper they pushed, the more the silence weighed on them. It wasn't the natural silence of the earth. It was the manufactured silence of a held breath. Elena moved in the center of the stack, her MK-13 replaced by the M9 pistol for now. The corridors were too tight for the long rifle, a maze of 90-degree turns and sharp junctions designed to break lines of sight. The walls here were different, smooth, cold concrete that sweated condensation. Droplets fell from the ceiling with a rhythmic plink, plink, plink that sounded like a metronome counting down time. "Check in," Graves whispered. "Clear front," Tex murmured, his MP7 raised. "No SIGs, no movement." "Clear rear," Miller grunted. They had advanced 300 meters into the mountain. By all tactical logic, they should have engaged a sentry by now. You don't build a fortress this expensive and leave the front door unguarded. Elena swept her thermal monocular across the walls. The concrete was uniformly cool. No hidden heat signatures. No electronics humming behind panels. It was sterile. "This feels wrong," she whispered to Graves. "It's a fatal funnel, sir. We're walking down a throat." "I know," Graves replied, his eyes locked forward. "But the tracker on Bishop is active. He's 2 levels down. We push until we hit resistance." They reached a junction. To the left, a dark corridor stretched into nothingness. To the right, a heavy industrial door stood slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out onto the wet floor. Tex held up a fist. "Freeze," he signaled to the door. "Room entry, dynamic." The team stacked up. Tex nodded. 3, 2, 1. They breached. Tex went left, Miller went right, weapons snapping to targets that weren't there. "Clear! Clear!" Elena stepped into the room, scanning the upper corners for cameras. The room was a mess hall. A long table, chairs pushed back hastily, a map of the valley pinned to the wall. But it was the smell that stopped her. Tobacco and coffee. She holstered her pistol and walked to the table. In the center sat a tin ashtray. A cigarette was perched on the rim, a long finger of gray ash defying gravity. A thin ribbon of blue smoke curled up from the cherry. It was still burning. Next to it, a styrofoam cup. Elena touched the side. It was hot. Not warm, hot. "They didn't evacuate hours ago," she said, her voice tight. "They left seconds ago." "They knew we were coming," Miller growled, lowering his rifle. "How?" "We jammed the signals. We bypassed the sensors." They didn't need sensors, Elena realized, looking at the half-eaten meal on the table. "They have hardlines, wired comms. The jammer doesn't touch that." She looked at Graves. "Sir, they aren't retreating. They're hurting us." Graves's face hardened. He tapped his comms. "Overlord, this is Viper 1-1. We are compromised. Target knows we are here. Requesting immediate drone support for..." Clang. The sound was massive, a physical blow that shook the floor. It came from the corridor they had just come from. The team spun around. The heavy industrial door at the junction, the one they had passed 30 seconds ago, had slammed shut. The sound of hydraulic locks engaging echoed down the hallway like a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. "Breach it!" Graves roared. Tex and Miller sprinted back to the door. Miller jammed a pry bar into the seam, straining against the metal. It didn't budge. "It's mag-locked, Commander!" Miller yelled. "This is a blast door. 10 inches of steel. We're not getting through this without C4, and even then... And if we blow it, we bring the ceiling down. Elena finished. Front! Tex shouted, spinning back toward the darkness of the corridor ahead. The lights in the hallway flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Then, red emergency strobes began to pulse, bathing the concrete in a bloody, rhythmic glare. A voice crackled over a hidden PA system. It was distorted, calm, and speaking Russian. Welcome, gentlemen and lady. You have come a long way to die in the dark. Graves didn't look at the speaker. He looked at his team. The way back was gone. The only way out was through the enemy. Eyes forward, Graves commanded, his voice dropping an octave into pure combat calm. We're in the kill box now. Switch to thermals. Anything that moves, you put it down. Elena brought her rifle up, the scope settling into her shoulder. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but she pushed it down into the dark place where she kept her emotions. She didn't need to be brave. She just needed to be accurate. Let's go say hello, she whispered. The red emergency strobes pulsed rhythmically as the team moved deeper, the shadows jumping and stretching like frantic ghosts against the wet concrete. The corridor opened up into a massive cavern, a hollowed-out subterranean loading bay used for moving heavy mining equipment. In the center of the vast, open space sat a lone wooden chair. Sitting in it was a man. He wore a ragged suit, his head slumped forward. Visual on Bishop, Tex hissed, dropping to one knee. 12 o'clock. 50 meters. He looks unconscious. Check the corners, Graves ordered, his voice tight. This is too easy. Where's the security detail? Elena didn't look at the man in the chair. She looked at the catwalks high above, shrouded in darkness. She raised her scope, scanning the gridwork of steel beams. The thermal image was messy. Hot steam pipes ran along the ceiling, creating a kaleidoscope of white and gray that camouflaged any body heat. I can't clear the rafters, sir, Elena whispered. Too much thermal clutter. We have to move, Graves said. Tex, Miller, secure the HVT. Kovic, hold the threshold. Cover them. Tex and Miller moved out into the open bay, weapons shouldered, moving with swift, aggressive steps. They were 10 meters from the chair when the man's head snapped up. He wasn't unconscious. He was laughing. Click, clack. The sound of massive breakers throwing echoed through the cavern. Instantly, the darkness was obliterated. Banks of halogen floodlights mounted on the catwalks slammed on with the force of a physical blow. The light was blinding, white-hot, and absolute. Elena gasped, tearing her eye away from the scope as the sudden brilliance seared her retinas. Contact! Contact everywhere! Miller screamed. From the darkness of the upper gantries, muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies. The roar of a DSHK heavy machine gun tore the air apart. Thud, 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 thud. The rounds impacted the concrete floor around Tex and Miller, sending up geysers of stone shards and sparks. The acoustics in the cave amplified the sound into a deafening, continuous thunder that rattled teeth and liquefied thought. Smoke! Pop smoke! Graves roared, firing blindly, toward the lights. Miller ripped a grenade from his vest, hurling it forward. Thick purple smoke billowed out, creating a pathetic screen against the wall of lead raining down on them. Elena was still at the threshold, partially shielded by the tunnel wall. She forced her eye back to the scope, squinting against the glare. She needed a target. She needed to stop that machine gun. Through the smoke, she saw Bishop. He hadn't moved. He was sitting perfectly still amidst the chaos, staring right at them. And then she saw the wires. Tex, abort! Get back! Elena screamed into the comms, her voice cracking. The vest! Look at the vest! Tex, scrambling for cover behind a rusted minecart, looked at the HVT. Bishop ripped his jacket open. Strapped to his chest were bricks of C4, wired to a dead man's switch in his hand. "Come closer, Americans!" Bishop screamed, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "Come and take the prize!" "He's a proximity trigger," Graves yelled. "Pull back! Fall back to the tunnel!" But the heavy machine gun fire shifted. It wasn't aiming to kill them anymore. It was aiming behind them, chewing up the floor at the tunnel entrance. The enemy was cutting off their retreat, pinning Tex and Miller in the open, exposed kill box with a human bomb. "I can't move!" Tex shouted. "I'm pinned! Taking rounds on the plate!" Elena rested her rifle against the doorframe. The DSHK gunner was dug in high up on the gantry, shielded by a steel plate. She could only see the muzzle flash. "Sir, I need a distraction," Elena said, her voice dropping into that cold, detached register. "Give me 2 seconds." "Miller, suppression! Now!" Graves ordered. Miller rolled onto his back and unleashed a long burst from his MK-48 machine gun, the belt feeding hungrily. It was inaccurate, but the volume of fire forced the enemy gunner to duck for a split second. That was all Elena needed. She didn't aim for the gunner. She aimed for the hydraulic line running above the halogen bank illuminating the gantry. Crack. The bullet severed the high-pressure hose. Hydraulic fluid sprayed out, hitting the superheated floodlight. Whoosh! A fireball erupted on the catwalk, engulfing the machine gun nest. The gunner screamed, falling from the gantry, wreathed in flame. The DSHK fell silent. "Move! Now!" Graves commanded. Tex and Miller scrambled backward, diving into the cover of the tunnel mouth just as Bishop's laughter turned into a scream of frustration. "He's not detonating," Elena noted, breathing hard. "He wants to take us all with him. He's waiting for us to group up." "We're not grouping up," Graves said, checking his magazine. "We're trapped. We can't go forward, we can't go back. We have to fight our way through the walls." The cavern fell into a momentary lull, the silence of a predator taking a breath before the kill. "Check ammo," Graves whispered. "This is going to get ugly." The lull lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the world exploded. The enemy didn't just fire. They poured lead into the tunnel mouth with the force of a frantic river. The air turned into a slurry of pulverized concrete dust, sparking metal, and the deafening crack thump of supersonic rounds passing inches from their heads. "Suppressing!" Miller screamed, his MK-48 machine gun chugging rhythmically. He was firing blindly into the cavern, the belt twitching as it fed into the receiver. "We can't stay here!" Graves yelled over the noise, pressing himself flat against the tunnel wall. "They're flanking right. I saw movement on the upper gantry. If they get an angle on the tunnel mouth, we're fish in a barrel," Tex shouted, reloading his MP7. "I'm moving," Graves shouted. "I'm going to the minecart. Miller, cover me!" "Sir, no!" Elena yelled, but Graves was already moving. He broke cover, sprinting 10 meters toward the rusted iron minecart overturned near the entrance. It offered a better angle to engage the flankers. He slid into position, his rifle snapping up. Thwack! A single round hit the cart, punching through the rusted metal inches from Graves's face. He flinched, scrambling back, but a second round sparked off the floor by his boot. "Sniper!" Elena called out. 11 o'clock! Hi! He's got the commander pinned!" Graves was trapped. The minecart was concealment, not cover. The sniper on the high ground had a direct line of sight to Graves's legs. If he tried to move back, he was dead. If he stayed, the sniper would just punch through the thin metal. "I'm pinned!" Graves barked into the radio. "I can't move! Miller hit the gantry!" Miller swung his machine gun up, but the angle was too steep. I can't get elevation. The roof lip is blocking me. Elena looked at the geometry of the fight. From her position behind the heavy blast door frame, she was safe, but she couldn't see the sniper. To get the angle, she would have to step out into the open, into the fatal funnel that the enemy heavy machine gun was currently shredding. She looked at Graves. He was curled tight behind the cart, dirt kicking up around him as the sniper walked rounds closer to his position. Do it, a voice in her head whispered. Do it, or he dies. Elena didn't think about her father, or the cold, or the unfairness of dying in a hole in the ground. She thought about windage. Tex, give me a 40mm on the floor, smoke and dust, now, Elena ordered. On it! Tex raised his rifle, the M320 grenade launcher slung under the barrel. Thump! The grenade exploded on the concrete floor 10 meters ahead, kicking up a massive cloud of gray dust and debris. Moving! Elena didn't run. She slid. She threw herself out of the cover of the doorway, sliding on her side across the smooth concrete floor, right into the open kill zone. As she slid, she brought the Mk-13 up. The world slowed down. She saw the tracers drifting over her head like lazy fireflies. She felt the shock wave of Miller's machine gun rattling her teeth. Through the scope, the dust cloud was a gray haze, but her thermal overlay cut through it. There, high up on the catwalk, a small, rhythmic heat bloom, the sniper's barrel. He was adjusting his aim, waiting for the dust to settle to finish Graves. Elena lay prone in the open, completely exposed to the entire cavern. If they saw her, she was dead in a microsecond. She exhaled. Her heart rate dropped. The reticle settled on the heat signature. Crack. The recoil punched her shoulder. On the catwalk, the heat signature jerked violently and vanished. Target down! Elena screamed, scrambling backward, crabbing her way back to the doorway. Cover her! Graves roared, abandoning his position and sprinting back to the tunnel as bullets chased his heels. He grabbed Elena by the drag handle of her vest and hauled her the last 3 feet into cover, just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the concrete where she had been lying. They collapsed against the wall, chests heaving, coated in white dust. The air tasted of copper and cordite. You have a death wish, Kovic? Graves gasped, checking his rifle. Just doing the math, sir, Elena wheezed, wiping grit from her eyes. You were the variable I couldn't afford to lose. Graves looked at her. The skepticism that had been there in the briefing room was gone, replaced by something harder. Respect. We're clear for now, Miller said, slamming a fresh box of ammo into his weapon. But that was the welcoming committee. What's the play? Graves looked at his magazines. He tapped his chest rig. Check your loads. Elena checked her pouches. She had fired 6 rounds. She had 4 magazines left. Miller was down a belt. Tex was reaching for his 3rd mag. We're heavy on targets and light on lead, Graves said grimly. We can't take another stand-up fight like that. We have to move fast, and we have to move quiet. We're going deeper. Deeper? Tex asked. Sir, the exit is behind us. The exit is a kill zone, Graves corrected. The only way out is to find another shaft. We go down. Elena looked into the darkness of the tunnel stretching behind them. It felt like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Winchester on grenades, Tex muttered. I've got 2 flashbangs left. Make them count, Graves said. Move out. The map on Graves's tablet was a lie. The maintenance shaft they had sprinted into, hoping for a vertical escape route to the upper ventilation levels. ended in a solid wall of corrugated steel and shotcrete. "Dead end!" Tex shouted, slamming his hand against the barrier. "It's sealed. Map said this went through to level 4. Intel is batting 0 today," Miller growled, spinning around to cover their 6. "We've got movement back at the junction. I hear voices. They're regrouping." Graves didn't waste time cursing. He tapped the wall. "It's a partition. Hollow behind it. Miller, blow it." "Sir, we're in a confined space," Miller argued, already reaching for his demo kit. "Overpressure in here will turn our brains to jelly if we use a full brick." "Use a half brick. Shape the charge. Just cut the steel," Graves ordered. "Kovic, watch the rear. Don't let them get a rocket down this throat." Elena moved to the prone position 10 meters back, using a pile of discarded mining ties as cover. Her breathing was ragged. The air here was thick with dust and the metallic tang of old copper. Through her scope, the junction they had just left was a green haze in her night vision. She saw the shadow first, a silhouette elongating against the wall of the main tunnel. "Contact," she whispered. "RPGs, I see the tube." "Fire in the hole in 10!" Miller yelled, molding the white C4 putty into a diamond shape on the steel wall. "We don't have 10!" Elena shouted. She saw the figure step out. It wasn't a precision shooter. It was a suppressive element. The RPG-7 rested on his shoulder. Elena fired. The round took the man in the chest, dropping him instantly. But as he fell, his finger clenched. The rocket didn't fly straight at them. It went high, spiraling erratically as the gunner collapsed, slamming into the ceiling arch directly above Miller and Tex. Boom! The explosion was deafening, but it wasn't the warhead that scared Elena. It was the sound that followed. A deep, tectonic groan that vibrated through the floor plates and into her chest. The blast had compromised the main support beam of the shaft. "Roof! The roof is going!" Elena screamed. Miller had the clacker in his hand, ready to blow the breach, but he was looking at the smoke. Tex was standing directly under the fracturing keystone, weapon raised, oblivious to the ton of rock detaching above him. Elena didn't think. The geometry of the collapse was etched in her mind instantly, a vector of falling stone. She abandoned her rifle. She scrambled forward, driving her legs into the dirt, launching herself at Tex. "Move!" She hit him with her full body weight, tackling him sideways just as Miller triggered the breaching charge on the wall. The world turned white. The C4 detonated, blowing the door inward. Simultaneously, the ceiling came down. A slab of rock the size of a vehicle slammed into the ground where Tex had been standing. The shockwave lifted Elena off the ground and threw her into the darkness. She felt a sharp, tearing impact on her right leg, hot and searing, before the debris rained down, burying the world in noise and dust. Then, silence. Absolute ringing silence. Elena coughed, her lungs burning with concrete dust. It was pitch black. Her NVGs had been knocked off. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face. "Sound off!" Graves's voice was a choked rasp from somewhere to her left. "Miller up. Ringing, but up," Miller coughed. "Tex up. Jesus, I'm up. Wraith? Kovic?" Elena tried to move. Her lower body felt heavy, pinned. Panic flared in her chest, the primal fear of being buried alive, but she forced it down. She reached down, feeling rocks and twisted rebar. She wasn't pinned. She was just covered. She pushed a slab of drywall off her chest and sat up. "I'm here," she croaked. "I'm clear." "Get lights on," Graves ordered. Beams of tactical lights cut through the suspended dust. The maintenance shaft was gone. The ceiling had collapsed entirely, sealing the tunnel behind them with a wall of impassable rubble. The breaching charge had worked, though. A jagged hole gaped in the steel wall ahead, leading into a dark, cavernous space beyond. "We're cut off," Miller said, shining his light on the rockfall. "No way back now." "We weren't going back anyway," Graves said. "Check for injuries. We move in 30 seconds. Elena went to stand up. A wave of dizziness hit her so hard she almost fell back down. The world tilted on its axis. Adrenaline dump, she told herself. Just the shock. She planted her rifle butt on the ground and levered herself up. Her right leg felt strange, numb. Not the pins and needles numb of a sleeping limb, but a cold, heavy absence of sensation. She looked down. Her tactical pants were dark coyote brown, so the blood didn't show as red. It showed as black. A jagged tear in the fabric halfway up her thigh was soaked. But it wasn't just the tear. The wetness was spreading. She could feel it running down inside her boot, hot and slick. It was pulsing. Oh, she thought, her mind detaching from the reality of it. That's a lot of blood. She shifted her weight. The leg held, but it felt weak, like water. "Kovic, you good?" Tex asked, walking over. He looked shaken. "You tackled me. That rock would have pancaked me, thanks." Elena looked at Tex, then down at her leg. She shifted her stance, angling her body so the shadow of her gear obscured the wound. "I'm good," she lied. Her voice was steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Just banged up. Let's move before they dig through that rubble." She took a step. The world swam again. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron, using the sharp pain to anchor herself. She knew anatomy. She knew ballistics. And she knew that if she told Graves she was bleeding from an arterial proximity, he would stop. He would call a halt to patch her up. They would lose momentum. They would be overrun. "Bind it later," she told herself. "Just keep walking." "Lead the way, Tex," Elena said, gesturing to the breach with her barrel. She followed them into the dark, leaving a trail of dark, heavy drops on the dusty floor that no one saw. The breach led them into a cavernous ventilation chamber, a cathedral of rusted steel and silence. Massive turbine fans, long since, seized by corrosion, loomed in the darkness like sleeping giants. The air here was thinner, sharper, carrying the metallic taste of ancient Greece and the coppery tang that Elena could no longer ignore. "Hold up," Graves signaled, his voice a harsh whisper. "Perimeter." "Miller, check that service hatch. Tex, get eyes on the corridor ahead. We catch our breath for 60 seconds. The team fanned out, their movements jerky with fatigue. The adrenaline crash was setting in, that dangerous lull where the body realizes how tired it actually is. Elena moved to a concrete pillar and slid down to a sitting position. The motion was intended to be casual, but it ended in a graceless collapse. Her right leg felt like it didn't belong to her anymore. It was heavy, a dead weight dragging at her hip. She looked down. In the green phosphor of her night vision, the dark stain on her trousers had expanded from her thigh down to her knee. Her boot felt squishy, like she had stepped in a puddle and the water had soaked through to the sock. But it wasn't water, and it wasn't cold. It was hot, wet, and relentless. "Check it," the medic in her head ordered. "Don't look. Assess." She holstered her pistol with a trembling hand and reached for the shears on her vest. She needed to see the skin. She needed to know if she was walking out of here or if she was already a ghost. She ripped the fabric of her pant leg open. The smell hit her first. The raw, iron scent of arterial blood. It wasn't oozing. It was pulsing. A piece of jagged rebar or rock from the collapse had punched through the meat of her inner thigh, nicking the femoral artery. It wasn't a complete severance. If it were, she'd be dead already. But it was a high-pressure leak. Every beat of her heart pumped life out of her body and onto the dusty floor. "Damn it," she breathed, the words barely audible. Her vision swam. The edges of the room were starting to blur, a gray vignetting that signaled hypovolemic shock. She was cold, so incredibly cold. She fumbled for the CAT tourniquet on her rig. Her fingers felt like sausages, clumsy and numb. She had practiced this motion 1,000 times in training, high and tight. Twist until the bleeding stops. Twist until it hurts more than the wound. She wrestled the strap around her upper thigh, jamming it into the groin crease. She cranked the windlass. 1 turn, the pressure bit into her muscle. 2 turns. The pain was white-hot, blinding, tearing a gasp from her throat. 3 turns. The pulsing slowed. She locked the rod in place and checked the pulse in her foot. Nothing. The bleeding had stopped, or at least slowed to a trickle. But the damage was done. She had lost too much already. "Kovic?" The voice made her jump. Graves was standing over her. He had moved silently, or maybe her hearing was going. He was looking at her exposed leg, at the tourniquet, at the pool of black liquid spreading under her boot. "Your report," he demanded, his tone dropping to a dangerous low. Elena looked up. His face was a blur of green static. She blinked hard, forcing her eyes to focus. She couldn't let him see the fear. If he saw the fear, he would call the medevac chopper. He would order the team to carry her. And in these tunnels, with the enemy closing in, 4 men carrying a stretcher were 4 dead men. "Shrapnel, sir," Elena lied. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Caught a piece of rebar in the slide. Just a deep laceration." Graves knelt, his hand reaching for her leg. "That's a lot of blood for a laceration, Wraith. Let me see." She pushed his hand away. The insubordination was a gamble, but she had to sell it. "Don't touch it. I've got the TQ on. It's clotted. You open it up. You just restart the bleed." Graves stared at her, his eyes searching hers through the NVGs. He saw the sweat beading on her forehead, the pallor of her skin that even the green glow couldn't hide. "Can you stand?" he asked. It was the only question that mattered. "Yes." "Prove it." Elena gritted her teeth. She planted her good foot and grabbed the pillar. She pushed. For a second, the world tilted sideways. Gravity seemed to double. Her bad leg screamed in protest against the tourniquet's bite. Gray spots danced in her vision. She swayed, her knees buckling. "Stand up," she screamed internally. "Stand up or you kill them all." She forced her knee to lock. She stood. She let go of the pillar. She wavered, then steadied. "I'm up," she rasped. "I'm combat effective." Graves didn't look convinced. He looked at the blood trail she had left coming in. He looked at the dark tunnel ahead. He was doing the math, too. "We have 2 clicks to the secondary extraction shaft," Graves said, his voice quiet. "Vertical climb at the end. If you fall behind..." "I won't fall behind." Elena cut him off. She grabbed her rifle, the weight of it threatening to pull her over. "I'm not baggage, Commander. I'm your rear security. Let's move." "Contact rear," Miller hissed from the hatchway. "I hear dogs. They're in the vents." The mention of dogs sent a spike of adrenaline through Elena's system, momentarily clearing the fog. Dogs didn't need light to find them. They smelled the blood. Her blood. "Go," Elena said, gesturing forward with her weapon. "I'll mask the scent with CS gas. Just go." Graves hesitated for 1 fraction of a second, a moment where the human wanted to help the wounded, before the officer took over. Tex, point. Miller, take the heavy bag. Kovic, stay in the middle, do not stop. If you go down, we drag you. Understood? Understood. The team began to move. Elena took her first step. It felt like walking on a wooden stilt. There was no sensation in her foot, just the grinding pain in her hip and the sickening sway of the world around her. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a caffeine gum, chewing it aggressively, praying for a stimulant hit to keep her brain firing. Just one step, she told herself. Then another. Then another. She limped into the darkness, leaving a few more drops of life behind her, hoping the dogs would choke on them. The concept of distance changed when you were dying. 2 kilometers. In training, on a flat track, that was 8 minutes of easy running. With a rucksack, maybe 12. But here, in the suffocating dark of the tunnel, dragging a leg that felt like a block of lead encased in fire, 2 kilometers was an eternity. Elena moved with a lurching, zombie-like gait. Step, drag, every time her right boot caught on a loose railroad tie or a patch of uneven concrete, the shockwave traveled up her femur and exploded in her hip. The tourniquet was doing its job. The bleeding was contained, but it was also strangling the limb, crushing the nerves against the bone. The pain was a high-pitched scream in her nervous system that drowned out everything else. "Pick up the pace, Wraith." Graves's voice crackled in her ear. He sounded calm, but the underlying tension was razor-sharp. "We're losing the gap." "Moving," she gasped, grit in her teeth. She looked ahead. The green glow of the SEALs' chem lights on their backs bobbed rhythmically. They were pulling away. 5 meters, then 10. They were moving at a tactical jog. She was barely managing a fast limp. She was the anchor, the variable that was dragging the equation down to 0. "Rear!" Miller shouted from behind her. "I've got movement! Shadows at the bend! 200 meters!" The crack of a rifle echoed, a single shot from Miller's MK-48 to keep their heads down. "Push it!" Graves ordered. "Don't engage unless you have a target. We need to get to the pressure doors." Elena tried to run. She forced her body to obey, throwing her weight forward. Her right foot caught a rusted rail spike. There was no sensation of tripping, just a sudden shift in gravity. She slammed into the gravel hard, the breath knocked out of her. Her rifle skittered away across the stones. "Man down!" Miller yelled. Elena scrambled to her knees, clawing for her weapon. I'm up! But she wasn't up. Her leg refused to bend. The muscles were spasming violently. Miller didn't keep moving. He stopped. He turned back, abandoning his cover to rush toward her. He grabbed her vest, hauling her upright with one hand, his machine gun leveled back down the tunnel with the other. "Come on, Kovic. Move your ass." Crack, crack, crack. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness behind them. The enemy wasn't suppressed anymore. They were emboldened. Miller jerked violently. A spray of sparks erupted from his left shoulder pauldron. The impact spun him around, and he dropped to one knee, grunting in surprise more than pain. "Miller!" Elena screamed, reaching for him. "I'm good. Plate check." Miller roared, struggling to bring his heavy weapon back up with one arm. "Go! Go!" Graves and Tex were there in an instant. The formation collapsed. The seamless machine of the unit broke down because of her. Graves didn't ask if she could walk this time. He grabbed the drag, handle on the back of her plate carrier. "Tex, grab Miller! We're burning it! Move!" Graves heaved, and Elena was pulled backward, her boots scraping uselessly against the floor. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was cargo. The humiliation burned hotter than the wound. Miller was hit because he waited. because she fell. "I can walk," she protested, trying to find her footing. "Shut up and shoot," Graves snarled, hauling her another 5 meters. "Watch our 6." Elena raised her rifle, resting the stock on her shoulder as she was dragged backward. The scope bounced erratically. Through the green haze, she saw them. Not men. Shapes low to the ground. Fast, undulating muscles and snapping jaws. "Dogs!" she yelled. "Attack dogs! Center tunnel!" She fired. The suppressed thwip-thwip of the MK-13 was lost in the chaos. One of the shadows tumbled, sliding across the wet concrete, yelping once before going silent. But there were more. 3, 4, maybe 5. "Flashbang!" Tex yelled, hurling a canister over Elena's head. Bang! The tunnel turned white. The high-pitched whine of the dogs changed to confused whimpering. "Door! Door right here!" Miller shouted, his voice strained. They reached the end of the haulageway. A heavy pressure door, designed to seal off sections of the mine in case of collapse or gas, stood open. Graves threw Elena through the threshold like a sack of grain. Tex shoved Miller through behind her. "Seal it!" Tex slammed his shoulder into the rusted iron wheel, spinning it. The heavy gears ground together, screaming in protest. The door began to slide shut, inch by agonizing inch. Elena rolled onto her stomach, aiming through the narrowing gap. The dogs were recovering. The lead animal, a massive Malinois, launched itself at the door. She put the crosshair on its chest. She squeezed. The dog dropped mid-air, skidding into the gap, its body blocking the door from closing the final 6 inches. "It's jammed," Tex grunted, kicking at the carcass. "I can't clear it." "Leave it," Graves ordered. "It's a choke point. If they want through, they have to crawl over it one by one. Set the claymores." Elena lay on the floor, her chest heaving, staring at the dead animal wedged in the door. Behind it, she could hear the shouting of men in Russian and Arabic. They were right there, just on the other side of the steel. She looked at Miller. He was slumped against the wall, Tex applying pressure to his shoulder. There was blood, a lot of it. The round had shattered the ceramic plate and dug into the trapezius. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Miller, I'm sorry." Miller looked at her, his face pale, sweat cutting tracks through the grime. He tried to grin, but it looked like a grimace. "Save the apology, Wraith. Just save the ammo." Graves walked over to her. He didn't look angry. He looked resigned. He looked at her leg, then at the map on his tablet. "We have 5 minutes to rig this tunnel to blow," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Then we move to the final extract. Can you make it?" Elena looked at her leg. The feeling was gone. It was dead weight. She knew the answer. "Yes, sir," she said. But as she checked her magazine, she knew she was lying. And this time, Graves knew it too. The heavy steel door groaned. A spark shower cascaded through the 6-inch gap where the dead Malinois was wedged, illuminating the tunnel in erratic, terrifying strobes. They were cutting the hinges. "They're through in 30 seconds, Tex shouted, his hands shaking as he spooled out detonation cord for the ceiling charges. "I need more time to link the blasting caps." "We don't have time." Graves returned fire through the gap, his carbine barking in short, controlled bursts. "Miller, get that saw up. Suppress that breach." Miller tried. He really did. He hefted the MK-48, but his left arm hung uselessly at his side. He gritted his teeth, resting the heavy barrel on a crate. But the recoil of the first burst nearly knocked him backward. He was gray-faced, bleeding through his field dressing. Elena watched it all from her position on the floor. She sat with her back against a concrete support, her rifle across her lap. The pain in her leg had receded, replaced by a cold, buzzing numbness that was slowly creeping up her spine. She looked at her watch. Stro 2:14 Zulu. She looked at the map on Graves's discarded tablet. Distance to extract, 800 meters. Terrain, uphill. She did the math. Team speed with casualty drag, 3 km/s. Enemy pursuit speed, 12 km/h. Time to intercept, 4 minutes. It wasn't a difficult equation. It was a subtraction problem. Tex, how long to rig the main junction? Elena asked. Her voice was steady, cutting through the noise like a frequency tone. 3 minutes minimum, Tex yelled without looking back. If we blow it now, we bury ourselves. We have to move up tunnel to the safe radius. You can't move up tunnel carrying me and Miller, Elena stated. Graves spun around, reloading. We are not having this conversation, Kovic. Get your gear. We're moving. Look at Miller, sir, Elena said, pointing. He can walk, but he can't shoot. You need a rear guard. I am the rear guard, Graves snapped. Tex takes point. You're in the middle. No. The word hung in the air, heavier than the gunfire. Elena reached down and unclipped her drag handle from her vest. She threw it on the floor. Lieutenant Commander, you need to detach. Now. The voice was terrifyingly calm, cutting through the chaotic scream of ricochets echoing off the basalt tunnel walls. Negative, Viper, Graves roared, moving toward her. We are not leaving a teammate behind. Miller, grab her vest. Don't touch me! The sharp crack of the Mk-13 sniper rifle deafened them in the confined space. Elena didn't fire at them. She fired past Graves' ear through the gap in the door. A scream echoed from the other side. Look at the floor, sir, she whispered, cycling the bolt. The metallic clack-clack was the only clean sound in the dirty air. Lieutenant Commander Graves looked down. His night vision flared, but he saw the black pool expanding rapidly beneath her prone legs. It wasn't a trickle. It was a torrent. The tourniquet had slipped, or the artery had retracted. It didn't matter anymore. Jesus. Elena. Graves breathed, the officer facade cracking for the first time. I can't walk. You carry me, we're slow. We're slow, we're all dead. They're cutting the hinges behind us. You need to blow the tunnel ceiling at the junction. That will bury you. I know. She adjusted her scope, her breathing hitching just once, a sharp, wet gasp before steadying. I have 26 rounds left. That's 26 dead hostiles. That buys you 3 minutes to set charges. Go. Elena. I said move, Commander. That is a direct interpretation of the mission profile. Save the intel, save the team. She fired again. Crack. Another drop. Go. Graves stood frozen. The logic was unassailable. The morality was unbearable. He looked at Miller, who was staring at Elena with wide, watery eyes. He looked at Tex, who had stopped spooling wire. Sir, the door, Tex screamed. The hinge is gone. The heavy steel door listed dangerously, held only by the dead dog and the bottom latch. Graves made the decision. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than killing. Harder than dying. He nodded, a single sharp dip of the chin. Tex, take Miller, go. Sir? Move! That's an order! Tex grabbed Miller by the good arm and hauled him up the tunnel. They didn't look back. They couldn't. Graves lingered for 1 second. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a claymore clacker. He tossed it onto Elena's lap. The wire is rigged to the ceiling supports 20 meters up, Graves said, his voice thick. When you're done, when you're ready. I know how it works, sir, Elena said softly. She didn't look at him. She was looking through her scope. Clear the blast radius. Graves stared at her one last time, the silhouette of a woman who had become a statue of war. Viper 1-1 out, he whispered. He turned and ran into the darkness. Elena listened to their footsteps fade. She was alone. The silence she had always sought as a sniper finally found her. But it wasn't peaceful. It was pregnant with violence. The bottom latch of the door gave way with a screech of tearing metal. The heavy steel slab fell inward, crashing onto the concrete floor. Elena exhaled, centering her crosshair on the empty rectangle of darkness that was now open to the enemy. "Come on," she whispered to the void. "Let's do the math." The dust from the fallen door billowed into the tunnel like a gray curtain. For a moment, there was no movement, only the settling of debris and the frantic shouting of men on the other side who hadn't realized yet that the barrier was down. Elena lay prone, her body fused with the concrete floor. She had positioned herself slightly off-center, using the lip of a drainage grate to stabilize her bipod. The Mk-13 Mod 7 was heavy, solid, and comforting. It was the only thing in the world that made sense. She breathed in through her nose, a shallow, controlled intake that didn't disturb her sight picture. Range, 40 meters. Wind, negligible. Angle, 0. A boot stepped through the dust, then a leg, then a torso. The first man was big, wearing heavy body armor and carrying an AK-103. He stepped over the carcass of the dog, scanning the darkness with a weapon light. The beam sliced through the gloom, searching for targets. It passed over Elena. She was low, covered in dust, her thermal profile masked by the cold floor and her own cooling blood. He didn't see her. He turned back, waving his hand. "Chisto, period!" Clear. Forward! 3 more men rushed through the gap, eager, bunched together. Mistake, Elena thought. She didn't aim for the head. At this range, with adrenaline pumping, a headshot was a vanity. She put the crosshair on the lead man's upper chest, right where the ceramic plate met the soft armor of the neck. Exhale, squeeze, thwip. The suppressed shot was barely a whisper, swallowed by the cavernous acoustics. The lead man's head snapped back violently, as if he'd been punched by a ghost. He dropped instantly, his legs folding under him. The other 2 men froze. For a split second, their brains couldn't process the data. There had been no muzzle flash, no crack of a rifle, just their point man dead on the floor. Elena cycled the bolt. Clack, clack, smooth, mechanical. She shifted the reticle 3 inches to the right. The second man was raising his rifle, screaming something unintelligible. Thwip. The round took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, screaming. The third man dove for cover behind the doorframe. He was smart. He didn't shoot. He dragged his wounded comrade back. Elena waited. She watched the hand gripping the wounded man's vest. She watched the strain in the forearm muscles. She tracked the movement. When the rescuer's head dipped low to get leverage, it appeared for a fraction of a second in the gap. Thwip. The helmet shattered. The dragging stopped. Elena cycled the bolt again. Clack, clack. Silence returned to the tunnel. It was heavier now. 3 men down in 4 seconds. No return fire. She didn't move. She didn't celebrate. Her heart rate was a steady drumbeat in her ears, slow and rhythmic. Lub-dub, lub-dub. The pain in her leg was there. A dull, throbbing roar that tried to demand her attention. But she pushed it into a box in her mind. She visualized the pain as a color. Red. And she painted over it with black. Focus on the reticle. Focus on the door. Grenade! She whispered to herself, anticipating the tactic. A dark object sailed through the gap, bouncing on the concrete. It rolled to a stop 10 meters in front of her. She buried her face in the crook of her arm, squeezing her eyes shut. Bang! The concussion wave washed over her, lifting dust from her uniform. Shrapnel pinged off the walls and the optic of her rifle. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the silence. She shook her head, blinking rapidly to clear the stars from her vision. She forced her eye back to the scope. They were coming again. They thought the grenade had cleared the room. Two shadows sprinted through the smoke, firing blindly. Their bullets sparked off the walls high above her head. They were suppressed by fear. They were shooting at ghosts. Elena didn't rush. She tracked the one on the left. Slow is smooth. She fired, he crumpled. She cycled the bolt. Smooth is fast. She tracked the one on the right. He had seen his partner fall and tried to slide into cover. She fired. The bullet caught him mid-slide, 5 down. A 6th man appeared, skidding to a halt just inside the doorway. He saw the bodies piled up, a wall of his own dead. He looked into the darkness, his eyes wide, searching for the squad that must be hidden there. He didn't see a squad. He saw nothing. He hesitated. Thwip, 6 down. Elena cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. No one else came through. From the other side of the wall she heard shouting, angry, confused shouting. They were arguing. They couldn't understand how a retreating force, battered and carrying wounded, had suddenly erected a wall of death. "Sniper!" someone yelled in Russian. "It's a nest! Flank! Use the gas!" Elena rested her forehead against the stock of the rifle. The barrel was warm. The heat mirage rippled slightly in front of her scope, distorting the view of the carnage she had created. She checked her magazine. 4 rounds left. She reached for her spare mag on her vest. Her hand was shaking now. The adrenaline dump was fading, and the cold was seeping back in. She ejected the magazine and slapped the fresh one in. 20 rounds left. She looked at the bodies. They were a barricade now, a physical obstruction that would slow the next wave. She had bought graves 60 seconds, maybe 90. She needed 3 minutes. She adjusted her position, wincing as the movement pulled at the tourniquet. She felt the wetness spreading again. The blood was finding a way. It always did. "Come on," she whispered, her voice cracking dryly. "Don't be shy." She wasn't fighting for her life anymore. That fight was already over. She was fighting for time, and time was the most expensive currency in the world. The enemy had stopped making mistakes. They had stopped rushing into the meat grinder. Instead, they began to dismantle the tunnel itself. It started with the blind fire. Dozens of rifles were held around the corners of the breached doorway, spraying the darkness with a chaotic, withering hail of lead. The bullets didn't need to aim. They just needed to fill the space. They sparked off the walls, ricocheted off the floor, and chipped away at the concrete pillar Elena was using for cover. Crack, whiz, thud. A round impacted the floor inches from her face, sending concrete dust into her eyes. Elena didn't flinch. She couldn't afford the energy. She lay motionless, her body a collection of failing systems. The cold was no longer just in her leg. It was in her chest, wrapping around her heart like icy fingers. Her vision was tunneling, the edges of the world turning a fuzzy, static gray. Inside the scope, a red icon began to flash in the corner of the display. Low bat. "Not now," she whispered, her tongue thick in her dry mouth. "Just hold on." The thermal image flickered. The white-hot forms of the enemy soldiers, huddled behind the doorframe, ghosted in and out of existence. They were preparing for something. She could see them passing objects hand to hand. Grenades. "Frag out!" a voice screamed in Russian. 3 dark shapes sailed through the gap. They didn't land near her. They landed short, mid-tunnel. The explosions were a concussive hammer, shaking the fillings in her teeth. The dust cloud thickened, blinding her completely. She was losing the visual war. If she couldn't see them, she couldn't stop them. Her mind drifted. For a terrifying second, she wasn't in the Hindu Kush. She was in a coffee shop in Seattle, sitting by the window. It was raining, a soft, relentless Pacific Northwest drizzle. She could smell roasted beans and damp wool. She could feel the warmth of the ceramic mug in her hands. It was so quiet, so peaceful. "Wake up!" the soldier in her screamed. She snapped back to the tunnel. The smell of coffee was gone, replaced by the acrid stench of cordite and the copper tang of her own blood. Through the flickering thermal scope, she saw movement. They were pushing through the smoke, emboldened by the grenade barrage. They thought she was dead. She scanned the breach, looking for a target. Her eyes snagged on a shape she had noted earlier, but ignored. A tall, yellow cylinder lying on its side amidst the rubble of the blown door. An acetylene tank, left behind by the mining crew. It was 10 meters from the breach point. 2 enemies were using it as cover, crouching behind it as they advanced. Elena shifted her aim. The crosshair settled not on the men, but on the valve of the tank. "Sorry about the noise," she murmured. She squeezed the trigger. Thwip! The bullet struck the brass valve, shearing it off cleanly. For a microsecond, there was a hiss, the sound of high-pressure gas escaping. Then, a spark from a ricochet, or perhaps the sheer friction of the bullet, ignited the mixture. Whoom! It wasn't a sharp crack, like an explosive. It was a deep, guttural roar. A ball of orange fire erupted in the confined space, consuming the oxygen instantly. The tank spun like a missile, clanging off the walls. The 2 men behind it didn't have time to scream. The overpressure knocked them backward into the breach, their uniforms wreathed in flame. The tunnel shook violently. Debris rained down from the ceiling, burying Elena's legs in a layer of dust. The enemy fire stopped instantly. The sudden violence of the explosion had stunned them. They were regrouping, terrified of what other traps this squad had laid for them. Elena let her head drop onto her arms. The recoil of the rifle had felt like a kick from a mule this time. Her shoulder was numb. That bought 60 seconds, she thought. Maybe less. She tried to cycle the bolt, but her hand slipped. She tried again. Clack, clack. It felt like lifting 100 pounds. Static hissed in her earpiece. A voice, distorted by distance and rock, cut through the ringing in her ears. "Wraith, this is Viper 1-1. Do you copy?" Elena forced her finger to the transmit button. "Copy. Charges are set. We are at safe distance. Blow it in 30 seconds. Get out of there, Elena. That's an order. Run." Elena closed her eyes. She smiled, a small, sad thing that didn't reach her eyes. Graves was a good officer. He still thought there was a version of this story where she ran. "Copy, 1-1, she whispered. "Fire in the hole in 30. She didn't move to get up. She didn't check her map. She just adjusted her scope one last time, watching the smoke swirl in the orange glow of the dying fire. 26 rounds, she counted softly. -7, 19 left. She waited for the shadows to move again. The 30 seconds Graves had given her weren't measured in time. They were measured in heartbeats, and Elena's were becoming terrifyingly slow. Thump, pause, thump, pause. The tunnel in front of her was no longer a tactical grid of angles and cover. It was a blurring watercolor of gray dust and muzzle flashes. She couldn't feel the floor beneath her elbows anymore. She couldn't feel the cold. She was floating. But the rifle was still there. The rifle was the anchor. 19, she whispered, the number shaping itself on her numb lips. A shadow detached itself from the smoke wall. A silhouette of a man sprinting low, weapon raised. Thwip. 18. He fell. Another took his place, stepping over the body without hesitation. They knew now. They knew she was the only thing left. They could smell the blood. Thwip. 17. She missed. The round sparked off the doorframe. Her hands were trembling, fine motor control dissolving into tremors. The enemy soldier fired back. A burst of AK fire chewed up the concrete inches from her face, spraying rock shards into her skin. She didn't blink. She didn't care. Adjust. Exhale. Thwip. 16. The man dropped. They were getting closer. 20 meters. 15. She could hear their boots crunching on the glass and debris. She could hear their breathing, harsh, angry, guttural. She fired faster now, abandoning the precision of the sniper for the suppression of the infantryman. Thwip, thwip, thwip. 13, 12, 11. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber. The metallic clack was loud, final. "Rifle dry?" she announced to the empty room. It was a statement of fact, devoid of panic. She tried to reach for her pistol, but her right arm felt like it was underwater. It moved sluggishly, fighting the resistance of the air. She fumbled with the holster retention. "Faster," she urged herself. "They are right there." A figure loomed out of the smoke, 10 meters away. He wasn't firing. He was rushing her, a bayonet fixed to his rifle. He wanted to finish it up close. Elena ripped the M9 Beretta from the holster. She didn't have the strength to extend her arms fully. She braced the pistol against the floor, aiming up. Bang! The unsuppressed gunshot was deafening in the small space. The attacker stumbled, hit in the gut, but momentum carried him forward. He fell 5 feet from her, clawing at the ground, trying to crawl the last few inches. Bang! 10! He stopped moving. More shapes. They were swarming now. A tide of darkness rushing to extinguish the last spark of light. Elena fired rhythmically. She wasn't aiming for kill shots. She was aiming for mass. Bang, bang, bang. 7, 6, 5. She looked at her watch. The display was cracked, but she saw the seconds ticking down. 03, 002. She had done it. The math held up. The enemy was on top of her. She could see the whites of their eyes. She could see the sweat on their faces. A soldier raised his boot to kick the pistol from her hand. Elena looked past him, into the dark ceiling of the tunnel where the team's charges were set. 4, she whispered. She squeezed the trigger one last time. Bang! The slide locked back. Empty. She let the gun drop. She closed her eyes. She didn't feel fear. She felt a profound, overwhelming relief. The burden was gone. The race was run. 0, she breathed. The world shattered. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure. The charges detonated 50 meters up the tunnel, between her and the team. The ceiling of the mountain gave way. Thousands of tons of rock, earth, and history came crashing down, sealing the corridor with the finality of a tombstone. The shockwave hit her a split second before the darkness did. It rolled over her, warm and absolute, blowing the dust and the enemy and the pain away. Then there was nothing. No pain, no cold, no noise, just the heavy, comforting weight of the earth, holding her still. The mountain didn't scream when it died. It exhaled. A massive plume of dust, pulverized rock, and smoke erupted from the ventilation shafts dotting the ridgeline, shooting hundreds of feet into the freezing night air like a geyser. The ground beneath the team's boots lurched, a deep, nauseating heave that felt like the earth itself was retching. Lieutenant Commander Graves was thrown to his knees on the extraction ridge. He didn't look at the ground. He looked back at the mine entrance, now a choked throat of rubble and twisted steel. "Wraith!" he screamed into his comms, the discipline of radio procedure shattering under the weight of the shockwave. "Wraith! Report! Sound off!" Static, the kind of white noise that sounded like the universe laughing. "Elena, do you copy?" Miller was lying on his back a few meters away, clutching his shattered shoulder. He stared up at the dust cloud blotting out the stars. He didn't say a word. He knew what that sound meant. He knew what a structural collapse of that magnitude felt like. "Viper 1-1 to Overlord," Graves barked, his voice cracking. "We have a man down. We are turning back, requesting immediate SAR, search and rescue package and heavy excavation equipment." The response from command was immediate, cold, and filtered through the digitized detachment of a satellite link thousands of miles away. "Negative Viper 1-1. Seismic sensors confirm total structural failure of the northern sector. The tunnel network has pancaked. Heat signatures are negative. You are in a hostile zone with critical casualties. RTB immediately." "I am not leaving her!" Graves roared, standing up and stumbling back toward the cloud. "She might be in a pocket. She might be—" Tex stepped in front of him. The point man's face was caked in gray dust, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He put a heavy hand on Graves's chest plate. "Boss," Tex said softly. "Stop. Get out of my way, Tex." "She blew the ceiling, boss. She dropped the mountain on the choke point." Tex pointed at the settling dust. "There's no pocket. There's barely a tunnel left. If we go back down there, we're just digging for tags." Graves stared at him, his chest heaving. The logic was there, cold and sharp as a knife, but the man inside the uniform rebelled against it. "You don't leave them behind. You never leave them behind." "She bought us the exit," Miller rasped from the ground, his voice wet with pain. "Don't waste it, sir." The sound of rotors cut through the wind, the heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of an MH-47 Chinook approaching low over the peaks, the extraction bird. It was huge, dark, and indifferent. The helicopter flared, its back ramp lowering onto the rocky shelf. The crew chief waved them in frantically, the engines screaming against the thin air. Graves looked back one last time. The dust was settling on the snow, turning the pristine white into a dirty, bruised gray. The mountain looked exactly the same as it had when they arrived, except now it held a secret. "Load up," Graves whispered. "Get Miller on board." They moved like old men. Tex helped Miller limp up the ramp. Graves followed, pausing at the threshold to look into the dark void of the valley one last time, waiting for a radio click, a signal, anything. Nothing but the wind. Inside the bird, the red tactical lights bathed them in a bloody glow. The crew chief secured the ramp. The Chinook lifted off, banking hard away from the target area, putting distance between the living and the dead. Graves sat opposite the empty seat where Elena should have been. Her pack was there. Her extra magazines were there, but the space was terrifyingly empty. He plugged his headset into the internal comms console. He needed to know. He needed to hear it. "Playback," he muttered, keying the flight recorder loop from the last 5 minutes of the mission. The audio hissed in his ears. He heard the gunfire. He heard the explosion of the acetylene tank. He heard the frantic screams of the enemy soldiers. And then he heard her. 26 rounds, -7, 19 left. Her voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of someone panicking. It was the voice of someone working. He listened to the rhythmic shots, the counting. 13, 12, 11. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the vibrating fuselage. He could picture her, the way she held the rifle, the way she slowed her heart rate. She hadn't stayed behind to be a martyr. She had stayed behind because she was the only one who could do the math. Rifle dry. The pistol shots. The final breath. 0. Then the roar of the collapse, followed by the absolute cut-off of the transmission. Graves ripped the headset off. His hands were shaking. He looked across the bay at Miller. The big gunner was staring at the floor, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "She didn't miss," Graves said, his voice barely audible over the turbines. "She didn't waste a single round." Tex looked up. "Does it matter?" "It matters," Graves said, clenching his fist until the knuckles turned white. "It matters because she decided. She didn't just die, Tex. She executed a maneuver." He looked out the porthole window. The mountain was just a dark shape receding in the distance, a tombstone made of granite and ice. "Overlord, this is Viper 1-1. Graves keyed the mic, his voice dead. "Go ahead, 1-1. Objective complete, HVT neutralized. We are Winchester on ammo, 1 KIA. There was a pause on the other end, a long, respectful silence that felt scripted. "Copy, 1-1. Status of remains?" Graves looked at the empty seat. He swallowed the lump in his throat that felt like broken glass. "Remains are irretrievable. She is holding the position, Overlord." "Copy. RTB out." Graves unclipped his helmet and set it on the bench next to him. He stared at the dark blood drying on his gloves, Elena's blood from when he had tried to drag her. The war was still going on. The sun would come up in a few hours. The world would keep spinning. But for the men in the back of the Chinook, the silence was louder than the engines. The auditorium at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was cold, air-conditioned to a sterile chill that felt nothing like the freezing wind of the Hindu Kush. The air smelled of floor wax and starch, not cordite and blood. Lieutenant Commander Graves stood at attention, his dress whites impeccable, the gold stripes on his sleeves gleaming under the stage lights. To his left, Tex and Miller stood in their dress blues. Miller's arm was in a black sling, the only visible evidence of the violence they had left behind 3 weeks ago. The admiral at the podium adjusted his glasses. He began to read. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action, while serving as a scout sniper attached to a Joint Special Operations Task Force." Graves stared straight ahead, focusing on a spot on the back wall. He listened to the words, but they felt hollow. They were good words. Selflessness, devotion to duty, extraordinary heroism. But they were clean words. They didn't capture the sound of the bone saw cutting through the silence. They didn't capture the smell of the acetylene gas burning. They didn't capture the wet, black look of the blood on the tunnel floor. Staff Sergeant Elena Kovic, with total disregard for her own safety, voluntarily exposed herself to overwhelming enemy fire to secure the extraction of her team. She didn't disregard her safety, Graves thought bitterly. She calculated it. She traded it. The Admiral finished. For her actions, she is posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. A master-at-arms stepped forward, handing a folded American flag and the medal case to Graves. Kovic had no next of kin listed in her file. No parents, no spouse. The Navy was her family, and Graves was her executor. He took the flag. It felt light. Too light to represent a person who had held up a mountain. "Detail, attention!" The ceremony ended. The officers mingled, offering condolences that felt scripted. Graves accepted them with a tight nod, then signaled Miller and Tex. They slipped out the side door, away from the brass, away from the speeches. They walked in silence to the team room. It was empty, the cages of gear standing like silent sentinels. Graves walked to the locker labeled Kovic E. He cut the lock with a pair of bolt cutters. The metal snapped with a sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. Inside, her gear was exactly as she had left it before deployment. A spare uniform, neatly pressed. A book on advanced ballistics. A bag of high-grade coffee beans, her one luxury. And a photo taped to the inside of the door. It wasn't a picture of family. It was a picture of her spotter from a previous deployment, a man who had died in Syria. She kept it light, Tex murmured, looking over Graves's shoulder. Always ready to move. Graves reached to the top shelf. There, tucked under a box of match-grade ammunition, was a white envelope. On the front, in neat, angular handwriting, was a single word, math. Graves opened it. Miller and Tex stepped closer. The letter wasn't long. There were no tearful goodbyes, no poetry. Commander, if you are reading this, the variables finally didn't add up in my favor. Don't waste time analyzing the failure. Check the dope, adjust the windage, and take the next shot. My gear belongs to the unit. Give my coffee to Miller. He drinks that swill from the mess hall, and it offends me. Give my rifle to someone who knows that the weapon is just a tool, and the mind is the weapon. It was an honor to walk the line with you. Don't look back. The target is always in front. Wraith. Miller let out a choked laugh, wiping his eyes with his good hand. She left me the coffee. Even from the grave, she's critiquing my taste. She was a professional, Tex said softly. To the end. Graves folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket, next to the medal. He felt a weight lift off his chest. She hadn't died scared. She hadn't died regretting. She had died doing exactly what she was built to do. He turned to the team. We have a debrief with intel in 10 mics. New intercepts from the region. About the mine? Miller asked. About the aftermath, Graves said. He picked up a file from the table and tossed it to them. Intercepted chatter from the local militia and the mercenary group. They aren't going back into the mountain. They declared the valley cursed. Tex opened the file. Translation? They call it the Tomb of the 26, Graves said. They found the bodies of their assault team, all of them. They say a demon was waiting for them in the dark, a demon that didn't miss. They say if you listen at the vents, you can still hear the counting. Graves walked to the door, stopping to look back at the open locker. Let them believe in demons, Graves said, his voice hard with pride. We know the truth. He turned off the lights, leaving the room in darkness, save for the single, unblinking red eye of the security camera, watching over the empty space where a hero used to stand. She was just a Marine who did the math,